I know you had a question as well, if you want to ask that first.
Yeah, I was curious as to what has been the transition for poetry here in Catalonia. Have the intervening years since Franco died, have we seen a stronger, more vital Catalan poetry, or was it particularly strong right after Franco died, or did it have nothing at all to do with the state of Catalan poetry, the transition?
Well, I think the transition definitely affected literature, and that literature opened up, and it really flourished, and a very distinct sense of freedom, freedom of expression. And I think that what has happened over the years is that Catalan literature and Catalan poetry, because I think their poetry is the strongest genre that they have to offer, much more so than their fiction or their theater, that it's blossomed in such a way that it's unbelievable. In the sense that there are many different generations. I've counted up to like 6 or 7 different generational groups interacting. From people that had published before the Spanish Civil War, like Josep Palau y Fabra, who was born in 1917, if I'm not mistaken, all the way down to young kids that are in their 20s, about to publish their first book and going to bars and reading poems and critiquing each other, or going to workshops or whatever. There are different aesthetic tendencies, so that it goes all the way from very, very classical and traditional, all the way to someone like Carlos Akmor, who's extremely revolutionary and kind of like an heir to the whole avant-garde movement at the turn of the 20th century. They're good writers all over the place. They're in Valencia, they're on the islands, they're in Lleida, they're in Perpignan. I mean, you name it, they're all over the place. Men and women. For years it was just men writing and an occasional woman. Oh. And everybody played up to her because she was the token woman. Now they're great women writers and great women poets that are just as good as any man writing. So that there has been this incredible kind of unfolding and developing of the creative potential of Catalan poetry. Curiously enough.
Great. Yeah.
If you could answer this to Richard as well, it's probably too general a question, but from the oppression previous to the transition to the freedom that exists now in Catalonia, is there a future for Catalan nationalism?
Is there
a future for Catalan nationalism that comes from the transition till now?
There definitely is, and they're coming closer and closer to the big question. And the big question is, are you going to be a part of Spain? And if so, how? And if not, are you going to detach yourself from Spain? And if so, how? And I think it's going to come to that big question. And that as time goes on, that question, for years, that was a ridiculous question. Nobody asked that because Catalonia was a part of Spain, period. And they don't want to break away. And recently I see a development in the past 4 or 5 years of young ideologists speaking up and asking the big question, do we really want to be a part of this? And all of a sudden, it's not a joke anymore. It's not a kind of surrealistic dream that somebody cooked up. It's possible. And there's a young attorney by the name of Héctor Bofill who writes. He's a constitutional lawyer. He teaches at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra, and he published an essay several years ago explaining exactly how Catalonia could become independent within the framework of Europe at this point in time. And that's a definite new item on the agenda that didn't exist before. And when I think back to when I first came here, there were no shops, no matter how Catalan they were, no shops had their signs in Catalan. And there was only one man, Foix, the famous baker, who had his signs written in such a way that they were bilingual. So when it said Bomboneria Selecta, that was in Spanish, and Bomboneria Selecta was in Catalan, so that it was exactly the same thing. And when you read all the signs on Foix, they're all completely bilingual. Most people just had their signs in Spanish, and now all of a sudden you walk down the street and they're all in Catalan. Well, that's a major change. And that came definitely with the transition, the language and the culture coming out of the closet and recovering a certain sense of self-government. And then, obviously, the whole issue has gone back to where it stopped in 1939, which was they were on the verge of deciding, well, exactly how does Catalonia fit into Spain, or does it? And then the Spanish Civil War came, and let's start all over again. And then after the death of Franco, the whole process has started again, and we'll reach a point where the big question will be popped. And Carod Rovira has said that the year to pop the big question is 2014, to celebrate one of the great anniversaries, historical anniversaries. But there's a definite sequence. First, okay, let's see what democracy has to offer. Okay, now we can see that within this democratic framework, we can be Catalan and we can have our governmental institutions return, and we can start to recover what we had. And then, okay, once we've recovered what we had, then that kind of levels off and we want more. And then that's kind of leveled off, and now we want more. And I think the whole second estatut, that's been a kind of frontier, a borderline that will trigger in the long run a whole new period, and that period will end up being the period during which the big question is asked as to what Catalonia wants. And Catalonia will have to decide whether it's a region or whether it's an actual country, whether it's a nation, or whether a nation can survive inside of another nation. That's the issue that was never solved, and it has to be solved. I have my personal opinion. My personal opinion is you have to go all the way.
Yeah.
Period. If you really want to be Catalan, the only way you can be Catalan is to have your own state and your own nation, period. And that I've never heard of a nation surviving inside of another nation. That just doesn't happen. And look at Eastern Europe. They've all been deciding over the past 40 or 50 years since the end of the Second World War and the end of the Cold War exactly who they are and what they want. And every time people have tried, like in the case of the USSR, in the case of Yugoslavia, of making nations survive inside of another great nation, that never works. That never works.
It makes me think very much of what's been happening in Scotland
Exactly.
in the last many years as well. The cries of the stateless nation.
It's exactly the same trend. And Scotland will either find its way or will fall and simply become a part of England and then have a language and some cultural traditions and a few knickknacks, and it'll be more of anthropological interest than of anything else. It's simply the way it is. That's what happened. That's how the United States was born. We've developed a different culture here. We're different. We're the same and we're different. And it happens all the time, all over the place.
Good. Good. That's good. Excellent. Thanks, sir.
Okay.